Good morning. This is State of the Arts NYC, and this is your host, Savona Bailey-McClain. And this morning, we have with us a very special guest. All of our guests are special. We have Delphine Selles Alvarez, who is the director of the French Animation Film Festival. And we're going to talk about the dynamics of French animation, not just globally, but also here in New York. So I just want to thank Delphine for joining us. So thank you so much.
And thank you so much for having me.
Yes. So one of the things that I wanted our guests to understand is that the French are number one in the world when it comes to creating animation, shorts, and feature-length films. Yet a lot of Americans are not aware of the French films that you will be presenting starting this weekend. And we're not aware of all the different details because even though you're number one, your operations is like a boutique sort of operation, and it's very nuanced, it's very curated. And I think it's important for us to understand why this is important, not just in your country, but around the world. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the films that you are going to be focusing on and why?
Well, it's true that France produces a lot of animated films, both features as well as shorts, and a lot of programs for televisions and now for the internet. And it's also true, as you said, that few of those programs make it to the U.S. I would say that the U.S. welcomes and releases about maybe a handful, maybe one or two each year of animated features, mostly films that are targets families and younger audience. But aside from that, there's actually an incredibly rich amount of films for adults, especially I think in the sector of short films.
Okay.
Which is a bit of a, and I think that's true also in the U.S., a bit of a great place for animators and directors to experiment and try new things and a new approach to filmmaking that would be harder to do with a feature film. And the goal of this festival, Animation First, is really to show the wealth of animation in France in all these different genres, features and shorts. We have a lot of shorts program this year that are especially made for adults. So that's pretty exciting to be able to bring to New York audiences all these films that they would never know about. And they're really kind of exciting and range from comedies to dramas to sci-fi and horror films. So we cover, I don't think I could say we cover it all, but we cover a lot of different types of animated films. We also have a lot of program for young audiences.
And see, that's interesting. See, in the United States, when one thinks of animation, you only think of children. You don't think of adults enjoying animation, which is kind of weird because if you saw animation as a child, you're going to naturally want to see animation as an adult. It doesn't leave you. So I think it's interesting how in this country we only focus on animation for children, but not for adults. And in your country, it goes across the spectrum, children, adults, families. You even have exotic films, you have erotic films, you have different types to deal with varying tastes. So I just find this very encouraging to know that this sort of genre can be appreciated across different, age, groups.
It seems like in the U.S. it's very divided between the big studios who do put out big films, and as you said earlier, will try to appeal to a mass audience and go to and reach out to audiences. So the films are very formatted for this type of audience, and yet in the U.S. you also have an independent animation industry, but it's much smaller and it's even probably harder for them to find their public.
Yes.
In France, the big difference is, I would say, is that you also have a government that helps the production of films.
Now, that's a difference.
Yeah.
But isn't that across Europe in general? That in Europe, most countries support the arts, where in the United States, we do not get that same level of support.
I think it takes place differently in many different countries. I think some countries have been better at others in supporting their artists. France has a very rich tradition of doing that, and especially in the film industry, which has been so important and so vibrant. And it started actually as a way to counteract a little bit American productions who came to France.
Really?
During the war and after World War II with the Marshall Plan, I think it's called. And there was a sense in France that you really needed to help French filmmakers and the industry so that you would actually have a production of French films and not just be overwhelmed. It's probably better than invaded by U.S. production. So there is a strong sense that you need to help out artists, and that happens with subsidies from the government. But it's also the film industry as a whole will put back the money into production.
Also, didn't film really begin in France in like 1907, 1908?
It started, well, that also is a contentious history. Yes, it would be the Lumiere brothers, but Edison also developed in New York, in the U.S., his own filmmaking, his own cameras as well. Yeah.
All right. No, because, see, this is the education that people need in order to understand, and it's really about opening people's minds to different narratives. It is not to necessarily tear down one particular narrative to say one is better, another one is better, I should say, but to expand that, because if you expand it and you look at it over a historical timeline, you can see where you can be more inclusive of different people and attitudes and perspective. And, so I did some research really about the industry as opposed to the festival, because just stating who they are would be meaningless if we don't understand why people should go. Right. And I think your festival is trying to encourage, broader audiences to understand the importance, particularly now that virtual reality and augmented reality is exploding. And it's not animation, but it does give that sort of feel. And so I think that's why I wanted to focus on the industry. Now, you do have one particular honoree, Michel Ocelet. Ocelet, I'm pronouncing it Americanized, but Ocelet, who has been a very important filmmaker in your country. He is now the guest of honor for your opening night. And tell us the film that he is going to have presented.
Michel Ocelet is actually a great example to talk about the support of the industry, because generally it's true that France has supported animation and cinema in general, but that has not always been easy, especially for artists. And Michel Ocelet started his career doing a lot of short films. He studied art in art school in France. He also studied at CalArts and went back to France and worked for television. Television at the time really was an important place for animations through series and short films based on comic books and different characters that were developed and suggested by TV stations. So there was a booming market. And Michel Ocelet did that for many years. He did very series that did very well, CDC, One Around a Little Duck. And it was, and I think it enjoyed it, but it was getting kind of hard to do something else. I mean, it was still a formatted environment, mostly also for young audience. And his producer said, you know what, you should try to do feature films. And he worked pretty quickly on proposing to do Kirikou and the Sorceress, which is the story, and that's the opening film of the festival. It's 20 years, so we're celebrating the 20th anniversary. And it's a story of a little African boy who has only one power. He runs very fast. He's a very smart kid. And he helps his village get rid of the sorceress. Not get rid of her, but get to her and transform her. I don't want to give you the end, but it's really a beautiful film. And he worked on it very quickly. And he himself grew up in Guinea, so he, for him that's a familiar environment.
Yeah, Guinea, West Africa.
West Africa, and he drew on that knowledge and growing up there. And he made that film, and that was actually not an easy task to get funding for it, in part because it was a little African boy and he was naked, and all the women were topless, and so he got a lot of pushback, and on that aspect of things, but also because his drawings were really beautiful and unique, but also very simple. And the industry was so used to the American format of distortions, of characters that are distorted and transformed and exaggerated. And for him, it was important to just stay simple. So he had a pushback, but he was able to make his film, which was released in France in 1998, exact same times as Mulan and The Prince of Egypt. So it was two big American films. No one really cared about Kirikou, but it turns out that over 1 million people went to see it. So it was an incredible success, a word-of-mouth success.
Yeah.
And that actually really transformed the industry for animated films on the big screen. Because suddenly people in the industry realized that there was an opening, and films like that no one believed in actually really drew a great audience in, and people really loved it.
A lot of that happens in the film industry. They come up with these formulas, and they think they know from whatever studies they put together that they know exactly what people will like. But oftentimes I find in art, you never fully know what people would like from what they don't like. Right. So that's good to hear.
Underestimating the public, unfortunately. It's true in the U.S. It's true in France sometimes, where they think they can have big comedies that will appeal to everyone, and it's just not necessarily the case. I think audiences are much smarter than we want them to think, or the industry wants them to think.
You're not giving them a chance to grow. Right. It's not even about being smarter now. It's about giving people a chance to know. So if you're living your ordinary life and you have this routine, that you're constantly engaged in, and you see something different that breaks from that routine, that allows you to imagine, you might just gravitate towards it. Right. And I think that is the power of art and cinema, to allow you to expand your everyday existence.
Absolutely, that's well said.
Yeah, because I think it's true. We want to dummy down people to make them predictable, and they're fighting and resisting that. Right. They want to be, more than that. Right. And so you also, I found this interesting. You have a partnership with the city of Bordeaux, and how did that all happen?
It all happened because Bordeaux is becoming a burgeoning city for animations and new technologies. They have new animation studios that have moved there. Ubisoft just opened a studio. That's one of the most important producer of video games. And they also have a lot of smaller studios for video games, and animation studios that actually put out short films and feature films as well. So it's a burgeoning city, and they're really interesting in making sure that people outside of France know about it, and bringing in new partners in the city and new projects as well. So it's a great partner for that, to be able to showcase the video game, especially in some of the animated films.
Because one of the things that also caught my attention, and that was, for a while, a lot of French studios went to Japan and China for a while, but now they're returning.
Right.
And is that one of the reasons why they're returning?
They're returning. So a lot of animated films are still conceived and produced in France or in partnership with other countries, but a lot of the time the actual making of the film happens in other countries. So you mentioned Japan. It's true also for North Korea. A lot of series were made there in the 90s. North Korea as well. Interestingly, there's a really great graphic novel, and I wish I remembered the name, by Gilles Delisle, that talks about going to North Korea to supervise an animated film. And also throughout Europe and Eastern Europe. But France has understood that it's also important to have the technicians and the animators in France. So there's more and more studios developing in Bordeaux and Angoulême and throughout France, where you have people actually being able to have the knowledge of making an animated film, as opposed to just sending the work in other countries.
I mean, I just want to dovetail for a minute. So you caught me by surprise when you said North Korea. So basically, because it's also a very poor country.
Yes, yeah.
Extremely poor. So therefore, I'm wondering, what we just discussed earlier, is that the possibility that one of the reasons they're interested in animation because it's a way for them to expand their everyday life. And this offers not just job opportunities, but it offers them a way to kind of broaden their everyday existence where they could tolerate some of the no, seriously, I'm being serious, tolerate some of the restrictions because it's a very restricted culture as well. It's not just poor, very restricted. So is that one of the possibilities? I don't want to speak for anyone there, but it makes sense. And, it was a complete surprise. I didn't expect you to say that.
My understanding is that the films are not shown there. They're really, I think they do the work, and I believe they're very good technicians, and also for financial reasons, they're also much cheaper.
Okay.
But I'm not sure the films are released there, and the process, I am thinking about that book, and I wish I remember the name, but the process is that they outsource the work in North Korea, but they can go supervised, but they're very limited in the contact they can have with North Korean. So they really just go to the studios and work with them and do the corrections and give them directions. But that's about how much interactions they have. And I don't believe any of the films are released there, unfortunately.
That is unfortunate because I think it would make a difference for that country and maybe allow others to be sympathetic to them. All right, so now let's talk about the women. You have 16 emerging filmmakers that are also participating. Did the Me Too movement impact France?
Well, there's definitely an awareness of the Me Too movement. I think it's... the reason is more like there's a lot of young women interested in animation and coming out of animation school, and very talented women. I had the pleasure of meeting several in Montreal not long ago. Women were just have really interesting viewpoint and imaginations and a creative universe that really are making very beautiful films, and that really matter. They're in their 20s and 30s. There are a couple of also older women making their first feature as well, which is, I believe, unprecedented because it's still a male-dominated world. But it's really exciting to have so many of them represented in the festival, for sure.
Well, that's good. Do you want to name one or two?
I will name Étreinte by Justine Vulesker, which is nominated for a César Award. And she made this film that was shown in Annecy and in many different festivals. And it's a really beautiful black and white film that she made on a very rare instrument called a pinscreen, which we will highlight. Yes, I was going to
ask you about that. Tell me about the pinscreen.
So she took over this instrument and learned how to use it, and that's the first film that has come out from this new generation of filmmakers. The pinscreen instrument is a very unique instrument that was created in the 30s by a couple, Alexandre Alexiev, who was a Russian-born artist, and his wife, Claire Parker, who was American. And they created these instruments because he did etching and prints, and he wanted to animate them and couldn't quite work with what was available in animation. So he created this screen. I'm going to try to give you a good description so you can somewhat visualize it. But it's a big screen with thousands of holes, and there are pins in each one of those holes. And when you have a source of light on one side and you push and pull the screen, it creates shadows. And so out of that, you can make beautiful tableau. And it's basically looks like a painting. So and then you use traditional stop motion. So you take a picture of that screen, which is black and white and shadows, and then you move the screens again and you take a picture, and then that's how you create animation through stop motion.
Wow.
And it's a unique instrument. They built several. One of them ended up in Canada at the Office National du Film, the National Film Board of Canada. That was brought there by one artist, Jacques Drouin. And now we have a wonderful artist, Michel Lemieux, who's working on that instrument. And she's coming to New York to the festival. Ooh. And then in France, they restored another instrument, and they're training a new generation. So it's a small family. It's an interesting lineage of people. And we're also going to be welcoming the grandson of Alexiev, who is Alexander Rockwell. He's an independent American filmmaker. He did In the Soup with Buscemi. People maybe remember that film. So that's the spin screen, and Justine did a wonderful film, and it's interesting to see because it's circulated all over the world, and so we're very happy to have it with us over the weekend.
Right, this is fantastic. Now, I did want to also mention the fact that your organization was able to reach out to Times Square Alliance, and you were able to participate in Times Square Arts Midnight Moment. And so you have featured the artist Virginie Keaton. And so when does that begin? February 1st?
It's actually started on January 1st. And
so it already started.
It's already, and it's on view until next week, until January 31st.
Right, because it's for a full month.
It's a full month,
and people need to understand the Midnight Moment is a program that the Times Square Alliance was able to get every billboard owner to agree to give a minute, so therefore art can be shown. And it's a really big deal because we've also had Saya Wolford on our show, and I know Saya, I was an admirer of hers for years, and I was there the first night it kicked off, and I got to meet her family. And it's amazing how all the billboards light up. So you can still experience that before the end of January 31st. So I'm highly recommending that. It's really a big deal to just sit there or stand there and watch all the billboards slowly turn into this, canvas of art.
Absolutely,
but that's a big deal. Now tell me briefly about Miss Keaton and her work.
She's also a young filmmaker. This particular film is her first film. She's only did another one, and she straddled the world of filmmaking and visual arts. And that film is really quite beautiful because she used all engravings from the 19th century hunting scenes with deers and dogs. And so you have that beautiful quality of drawings that she animated, and she redid a lot of the drawings out of those old engravings. And it's a really completely strange universe. And to see that actually in Times Square is quite something, because suddenly you have all these deers popping up, black and white, running with rain, and things shift around. Something happens in the film, and the deers are running after the dogs. And it's absolutely mesmerizing. And it's a little bit, there's a little bit of a scary element to it, but really beautiful. And everybody I've witness watching this in Times Square was really taken by the work, because as you said, it's incredible to see this on the big screen, on many billboards,
many screens. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I had a lovely chat with you. Now tell us the details of when the festival begins and the website, so people could get details on the website.
The festival kicks off on Friday at 7 p.m. with Kirikou and the Sorceress, and throughout Saturday and Sunday. And the website is FIAF.org, FIAF.org.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Delphine.
Thank you.
And it was great to talk with you. And congratulations on your second edition of the French Animation Film Festival, Animation First.
Thank you so much, Savona.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.